In the late 1800s, Jack, a God-fearing man, attended Sunday Mass. It was a beautiful ceremony as always, and Jack felt fulfilled. After breaking bread and drinking wine with his beloved church, he bounded towards home. Jack was not a wealthy man. He did not have the luxury of a steam-powered automobile or a horse to ride. He would walk through town passing the local library. Usually he would stop inside, but today it seemed they had closed early. After strolling through town, Jack would reach the vast woods that stretched between him and his log cabin. As a kid, Jack would remember cutting through the woods to go to and from town, following a path that he could remember like the back of his hand. Mass ran long that Sunday, and Jack wanted to get home before it grew dark. So without hesitation, Jack entered the forest, bounding down the path he, as a child, had been through so many times. As he was making his way through the forest, he noticed that things had changed quite a bit since then. Tall trees that he used to use as guidance must have been cut down to provide the city with much-needed lumber. But Jack was a man of his wits and knew the general direction he would travel. The sun was almost set as Jack saw a stone enclosure ahead of him, sticks cracking and leaves ruffling as he walked towards the well-lit structure. It struck him as odd. His old cabin had been there for years, before Sterling City was even a thought in anyone's mind. From what he knew, he was the last to live in the woods. Shadows of dancing light emit from in between the rocks, and Jack, now realizing he had new neighbors, wanted to create a bond and get a feel for who was living next door. As he approached the stone structure, a man opened a roughly made door to greet him. Jack walked up and took off his hat as a sign of respect and stuck out his hand to the stranger. The man standing before him was burly and stood tall. His one leg was shorter than the other, due to a peg leg that had been worn down from the rough terrain he lived in. As Jack held out his hand, the man living in the rock enclosure stared back at Jack. The ominous man had a long orange beard, cracked glasses, overalls, and a thick wool jacket. Jack started to feel quite uncomfortable from this exchange and started to withdraw his hand. As Jack pulled his hand back, the strange man acquired a crazed look in his eye. The man had a hatchet drawn to his side. He swiftly dislodged the hatchet and cut Jack's hand clean off at the wrist. Jack was completely and utterly horrified. Without time to process and with searing pain coursing through his arm, he attempted to run towards his home. Jack only got a few feet before the big man threw his weapon towards Jack's heel. The hatchet stuck right into his ankle, causing Jack to fall over, screaming in pain. Jack turned towards the man, pleading for God to save him. The man walked up and kicked Jack straight in the face. Jack had been knocked out. When Jack awoke, he was stunned and drunk off the pain he had endured. The big man was sitting on a stone in the corner of the room he was in. Jack saw around him a very crude home, stone with clay affixing the stones in place. He tried to talk but realized he was partially gagged, a rope around his mouth attached to the sides of the table he was on. Jack could feel his arm, but was so numb to the pain due to blood loss and adrenaline coursing through his veins. Jack peered over to the man who finally spoke, his voice crackling and raspy, as if it had not been used in years. His dialect was broken English, as if he had been living in the woods forever. "You friend, I make friends big and strong like me." Jack was confused and trying his best to keep conscious, the whole time praying for salvation and riddance of this horrible predicament. For the best of Jack's ability, he stated, "What do you want?" The big man stated, "I no have family. I no have friends. I want have love. I want a friend." Jack tried to talk his way out of the situation. "I will be your friend. I tried to be your friend when I arrived." The big man got very angry, slamming his fist down on Jack's chest, drawing all breath from Jack's body. "You lie. All leave me. No mother, no father, no friend. I make you big. You good friend then." Jack attempted to speak, but the big man held his hand over Jack's mouth and nose. Jack struggled to get free, but his attempts were futile. He even attempted to bite the man's hand, but his hand was so big it arched right over his entire mouth. Jack passed out from lack of oxygen not soon after. Jack awoke to a searing pain. He tried to scream but was gagged and could only muster a small screech. The big man looked at him. He was standing on his left side, ripping the bone from his forearm. Jack prayed harder than he ever did in his entire life, but it was as if his prayers fell on deaf ears. The big man had successfully pulled the bone from its socket, Jack's muscle and skin going limp from the elbow down. Jack was surprised, but he did not feel much pain. He felt immense pressure and was extremely scared just staring into the large man's eyes. The man looked at Jack and said, "I give you strong leaf, make pain go away. I make tall, I make strong. Look at what I do." He gestured over at Jack's right arm. Jack did not realize, but he had already finished working on that arm. A piece of wood was shoved up to his elbow, extending feet from where his wrist used to be. Jack's eyes grew wide as he shouted to his lord to free him from this hellish scene. He then felt immense pain as the big man shoved another piece of lumber up his left arm, affixing it to his skin. Jack was confused on how he was even alive. It was as if this man had had great practice. The man then spoke up as if he could hear what Jack was thinking. "You are not first friend. Lost many friends, but know now how friend is made." Jack watched as the man made his way to the end of the table near Jack's face. "I see how you look at me. I know you will look at me better soon." Jack fainted once again. When Jack woke, he could feel dry blood on his arms as the wounds had been sealed. Jack was still confused as to how he was even alive at this point. Pleading with his God, he hoped for a way out of this nightmare, but it was pointless. He was bound down from every end. The man was carving something that looked circular. The knife he was holding rusty and jagged, as if it had been found in the woods years ago. The man walked over and affixed the wooden oval to Jack's face. "I did it. Your new face." Jack screamed in horror, muffled by a strap of leather over his mouth. The big man said, "No worry, I do this many times." Jack watched as the man took the blade and hovered it over his face. He felt every second as the deranged man sliced through his skin, eventually tearing off his skin from chin to scalp. Jack yet again fainted. While dreaming, Jack was in the woods, reverted back to a child. He was hopping through the forest as he once did, but it was dark. Jack had no memories of being in the woods that late. When passing one of his landmark big trees, he saw a smoky entity, black tendrils with smoke so concentrated they were almost not translucent in the moonlight. Jack screamed and started running towards his childhood cabin, but it seemed this smoky apparition was one step ahead of him the whole time, appearing in front of him over and over again until it was so close. Jack had nothing to do but admit defeat. In his dream, the apparition was in the form of a man, but his features were beastly. The entity is still translucent. All Jack could make out on the face was glowing red eyes that seemed to burn with the energy they emitted. In his dream state, Jack was frozen still. The entity let out a voice, light yet deep, crackling in its demonic tone. "I will keep you alive, Jack. Your God will not save you. I have already claimed you." Jack looked down at his hands and saw they were gone, wood replacing them. Still dreaming, Jack remembered what happened to him before he got knocked out. He attempted to speak, but his mouth would not move. Jack suddenly woke up, head tilted to the side as the straps that held it were now removed, his eyes bloodied and his face missing. Attached to his head was the carved wooden mask, which seemed to fit his muscle and bone tissue well. A piece of leather crudely cut and sewn into his skin. When he tried to blink, nothing happened. His eyes were burning, and he could barely make out the room around him. But what he did see gave him the sensation of pointlessness. In the corner of the room, his hands and feet were sitting there. Jack, lost by now, didn't even try to pray. The immense pain and blood loss that should have killed him, draining his last ounces of energy. Jack mustered the strength to upright his head, seeing his torn body, his arms and legs limp, bones removed to the elbows and knees and crude wood shoved inside, skin torn and stretched. The man was not in the room. He must have been outside waiting to see if his new friend made it through surgery. Jack was dumbfounded. How was he alive? What was with that dream? As he pondered this, broken and defeated, he saw dark black smoke arise from the floor from every angle, dark tendrils rising with the smoke. From the cloud a face arose above Jack's. Jack then heard a voice similar to the one he heard in the dream. "I have kept you here, Jack. Your God cares not what happens to you, but I do. Odd way of showing it, but I have seen you your whole life. A lonely child doomed to live a senseless life, devoting it to the one who cares not. As a child you were beaten down, your family abandoning you just as everyone you have met has, clinging to books and attempting to make sense of your situation." Jack attempted to fight the words spoken by this entity, but realized it was no use. His God had abandoned him. His whole life was that of a commoner, hated by the other commoners. "Join me. Jack and I will give you everlasting life. I only ask that you do my bidding. Patrol these woods and ensure nobody touches the home you love. Wreak havoc on those who dare step into your home, and get revenge on all those who have hurt you. Accept my offer, and be free of this tragedy forever." Jack tried to call to his God one last time, but as all of his other attempts, his prayer also fell on deaf ears. Jack lifted his head with the last ounce of energy his dismantled body could muster and nodded his head, the smoky being let out a deep, loud laugh as it seeped into his wounds. Jack watched as the skin around his arms fused with the wood, tendrils emitting from his skin. Jack could feel immense power course through his being. He felt as his face fused with the mask, his eyes dematerializing. Jack could feel the entity fusing with his mind, his thoughts still there, but accompanied with demonic power and intent. Jack felt hatred for all, the God who left him, the children who made his life a living hell, the parents who orphaned him, everybody. But what he felt most was the hatred of who had created him, the man outside of the stone structure. His body now tall, limbs long with a wood-like appearance with smoke wisping off each end. The otherworldly force of man and demon forever being known as Slenderman. Slenderman ripped himself free without shredding an ounce of energy. He stood tall aside from table that had created him. The deranged man stepped away from his campfire to walk back to his stone hut. His eyes widened as he turned around and was met with the demonic figure. In front of his disfigured home was Slenderman, moving at otherworldly speeds, Slenderman bound towards his oppressor. He extended his arms, the tendrils affixing to the burly man's hands. The smoke poured into and around the frightened man's forearms up to his shoulders. Screaming in fear and pain, the man tried to move, but it was no use. Slenderman's immense power held him. In a split second, the smoke and tendrils encapsulating the man materialized into wood, simultaneously crushing and obliterating everything up to the large man's shoulders, the immense heat searing the gaping holes of where the deranged man's arms once were. A confused and ill-fated man burling out in agony. With a swift motion mere seconds after, Slenderman swept the legs of his oppressor out from underneath him, shattering his bones and knocking him to the ground. Slenderman then proceeds to punch a hole straight through the face of the man who once held him captive. After enacting revenge, and his demonic energy feeding from the fear and destruction of his enemy, Slenderman bound towards his home. Upon arriving, he looked down at the door he once felt comfort to open. Entering his home, he found his best suit, his human side feeling the smooth and once coveted piece of clothing. The tendrils from his body reached out towards the suit and started affixing it to Slenderman's bare body. The suit seemed to form to his new exterior, his power emanating into it as it stretched and morphed to his liking. From that day, only the most reckless souls entered the woods of Sterling City. A slender man was always watching, waiting to feed on those who dare step foot in his home. If you enjoy my stories, please feel free to follow, turn on notifications, and interact with this post. Your interaction makes a huge difference. I have a good number of stories already created and much more to come. I am on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under the name Creamy's Horror Stories, and on Twitter as Creamy's Horror. If you have any suggestions, feel free to reach out.